best known for my book, Fingerprints of the Gods. It made the case that civilization is much older and much more mysterious than we thought. For publishing that book in 1995, I was subjected to just a giant amount of bizarre and furious criticism from the archaeological world. And they said that I was completely wrong and they'd got the whole story of civilization taped. And one of the magazines that particularly attacked me was New Scientist magazine in England. So a couple of years ago, I was really pleased to see this headline in New Scientist. The True Dawn, civilization is older and more mysterious than we thought. Things are changing. Things are changing. Now, this is my new book, which is the sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods, and a lot of what I'll tell you today, you can find much more information on that in Magicians of the Gods. And this is my wonderful wife, Santha, who took the majority of the photographs you'll be seeing today. Santha and I have worked together non-stop for 25 years. We've been at the bottom of the ocean. We've been at the top of the Great Pyramid. I would never have done anything that I've done if I hadn't had this amazing woman by my side. Thank you. So, it's natural and right and proper that we should all be struck by the sense of mystery that emanates from the past. It's a place where there are just many, many questions and very few answers. The sense of mystery is paramount. And then we see extraordinary things like the Great Pyramids of Giza, these giant, almost perfect monuments, and then curious imagery like this in the crypt at Dendera. And it's natural to wonder, what are we looking at? Are we dealing with some kind of technology? What's going on with all of this? How the hell did they do these extraordinary things? And, you know, when we look at some of the big blocks of stone that are lifted, you know, the notion of teams of men shoving the stuff up hills when it breaks modern trucks is just a little bit difficult to take. But I don't think we have to conclude that the answer is aliens did it. Maybe a lost human civilization had powers and abilities that we ourselves do not have. Let's keep an open mind to that possibility. So not all ET ray guns are ET ray guns. These are two of the monolithic statues from Tiwanaku in Bolivia. And you'll see that they're holding curious objects in their hands. And there has been speculation that these are ET objects. They're not. They're quite recognizable, as a matter of fact. They are snuff trays for the consumption of an Adenanthera colubrina, a dimethyltryptamine snuff. These trays are still used in the Amazon rainforest, which is close to Tiwanaku. And it tells us that the citizens of Tiwanaku venerated altered states of consciousness. It says nothing about alien intervention. Here's Maria Rijke, who I had the privilege to meet before she passed away. And you know, she has long ago pointed out that the Nazca lines must not be construed as landing strips for aircraft, because the aircraft would have got stuck. The desert there is soft, and the Nazca lines are certainly not landing strips of any kind, nor imitation landing strips. They are maybe something much more mysterious than that, a whole constellation diagram laid out on the plains of Nazca. Not all megaliths are old. I made an extensive research trip in Indonesia in 2014. And there are existing megalithic cultures. We're looking at one here. If you look at the imagery on the screen, all of these megaliths have been raised within the last 200 years, and they're still putting them up today. They have megaliths there that weigh more than 30 tons. They bring them distances of about 5 kilometers from the quarry to the site, and then they raise them up. I asked them, do you use buffalo to drag the megaliths here? They're so heavy. They said, no, we use teams of men with ropes and rollers, but afterwards we slaughter the buffalo and give them to the men to eat. So not every large block of stone has to be the work of aliens. I can see these people making these megaliths today. Not everything that looks like an alien spaceship is an alien spaceship. This object here is in Armenia, in rock art in Armenia. And when our Armenian friends took us up there and told us that the area was renowned for UFO sightings, I was very excited to see what looked like a UFO with jets of flame jutting out from underneath it. And you can see even like a fleet of UFOs there. You see the 4 jets of flame and the curved dome top that you see there. And then here we're looking closer. There's the curved domed top and there's the jets of flame coming out. I was convinced that we were dealing with UFOs until I began to look much more closely at the petroglyphs on that mountaintop. And when I did so, I found that actually what those objects that I thought were UFOs are, they're ibexes. They're ibexes. You can see it here most clearly. And in some cases, they complete the dome round, and the jets of flame, they're the legs of the ibex. So let's not jump, to conclusions immediately just because something strikes the eye. Now, Baalbek, an amazing site, very close to the Syrian border in the Lebanon. Really an incredible place. I was well aware when I went to Baalbek that it has been claimed that there's a giant megalithic platform at Baalbek, and that giant platform was built to take the weight of alien landing craft, specifically the landing craft of the Anunnaki or the Nephilim. And that megaliths had to be used to make the whole platform because the weights that it would support were so heavy. It seemed like a very convincing argument, but when I got to Baalbek myself and looked at ground truth, I found that this could not possibly be the case. Let me explain why. I'm sitting on that platform at Baalbek, and clearly what I'm sitting in is a Roman temple. This is the Roman temple of Jupiter at Baalbek. And those are 6 of the remaining columns. There used to be 54 of them. Here's a map of the whole complex, and I'm going to focus around here because this is the area that has been claimed to be the landing platform for the Nephilim. We'll go back to this shot, and essentially what we're doing is we're looking south. We're looking south and we're seeing these columns behind me. If we look in the other direction, we can see another Roman temple, the Temple of Bacchus, nearby. By the way, the Romans could move very heavy blocks of stone. There are blocks of stone that have fallen from the pediment up here that weigh in excess of 300 tons. They've been raised to 70 or 80 feet above the ground, and they're definitely the work of the Romans. But I don't think all of this site is the work of the Romans. If we look up now towards the Temple of Jupiter, we can see in the foreground that actually there are no megaliths here. There are very small regular blocks. And if we look down from the Temple of Jupiter, we can also see that this platform is not built of megaliths. It's built of small regular blocks. You can see it in excavation. So back onto the top where the Temple of Jupiter now stands, let's look on the north side. If we look over that platform, we do see giant megaliths running along the north side, but they're separate from the platform. They are not connected to the platform. There's a gap of about 35 feet between the megaliths and the platform. These are true megaliths weighing in the range of 600 tons each. Now, again, you can see that megalithic wall running quite separate from the Temple of Jupiter platform. Megalithic wall, and here's the platform, quite separate, and the platform is not made of megaliths. If we go to the south side, we can see again these extraordinary megaliths in the range of 500 to 600 tons. And they run all the way along the south side. So you have a wall on the north side, and you have a wall on the south side, but in both cases they're separate from the platform. There's that wall of huge blocks. And let's continue on. Again, on the north side, the separate wall. Here I'm standing there for scale. But where it gets really interesting is when we go to the western wall of Baalbek. Remember, it is separate from the platform. When we go to the western wall, we find ourselves confronted by the trilithon. This is the trilithon. These are 3 huge blocks of stone weighing around 900 tons each. and they are raised above other blocks of stone weighing about 600 tons each. But they are not part of a megalithic platform. They are separate from that platform by about 35 feet, although on this side it's been filled in. So there I'm pointing up at the trilithon, those 3 900-ton blocks. And this gap here is, in this shot, you can see it here, and there I'm actually sitting on top of one of the trilithon stones, and the gap between it and the platform here has been filled. Mainstream academics say they have a killer argument to prove that that U-shaped megalithic wall running on the north, west, and south sides of the platform was actually made by the Romans. I don't think they're right. Their killer argument, if you can see the screen, is just in front of my right foot here. Down at the bottom, it's this slightly darker block in the foundations. When we look more closely at that block and excavate it a bit, we find that this block in the foundations is a piece of a Roman pillar. It's a piece of one of the pillars that had fallen on the top. So the academics say this proves the Romans did everything, because we have a Roman temple on top and we have a Roman column drum being used, reused, recycled as a block in the foundations, so the Romans must have done it. But what they're not taking into account is the centuries of warfare to which Baalbek was subjected. Baalbek was used as a fortress for the best part of 1,000 years. And in that time, its walls were repeatedly undermined by attacking armies. They were firing those huge catapults with rocks at the walls, demolishing bits of the walls, undermining the walls, mining beneath them. And there are records of repairs being done. And I would say what we're looking at here is a repair block that was done in Arab times to an undermined foundation. I think the Arabs put that there. I don't think the Romans had anything to do with it. And you can see other places where we know that the Arabs used recycled Roman column drums, like here. You can see a recycled column drum there. And if we get closer, we can see that it's just as well fitted as this one. So I don't think that this proves that the Romans built the megalithic wall at Baalbek at all. And then there's something else. When we go to the quarry where the megaliths were hewn out, we find the really big blocks. This one weighs over 1,000 tons. That's me standing on the top of it there. They call it the stone of the pregnant woman. It's completely separated from the bedrock underneath. And the view of the academics is that the Romans made this, but then they found they couldn't move it, so they just left it there. And they also left this one there, having gone to all the trouble of making it. This one weighs 1,200 tons. And then, you know what? Just last year, just in 2015, another one was discovered. This one lying here below the stone of the pregnant woman was unknown to archaeology until the summer of 2015. Why was it unknown? Because the whole thing was covered with sediment. Then they excavated it and they found that it's the biggest of all. This megalith actually weighs 1,460 tons. So the argument is that the Romans, having gone to all that trouble to cut and hew these blocks square, they then discovered at the last minute that they were just a wee bit too heavy to move. So they couldn't move them, so they just left them there. I have to tell you, that's a very un-Roman thing to do. If the Romans had cut these blocks, and if they had found they couldn't move them, they would have sliced them up like loaves of bread. And they would have used them to make smaller blocks. A lot of the work was already done. This suggests to me that this whole area was unknown to the Romans. I think the whole thing was covered with sediment, just as that latest megalith was covered with sediment, and that Romans never knew it at all. In other words, I think in that megalithic U-shaped wall around the Roman temple of Baalbek, I think we're looking at a prehistoric megalithic construction, which made that site sacred, and that's why it then became a sacred place. Let's move over to Giza in Egypt. And the Great Pyramid, arguably the most extraordinary ancient monument in the world. The Great Pyramid is situated on a significant latitude. It's situated on latitude 30 degrees north. That's 1/3 of the way between the North Pole and the equator. There's a slight error of a few seconds of 1 degree, and it's been argued that that may have been because of atmospheric refraction taking bearings on true north. The other point is that the Great Pyramid is almost perfectly aligned to true north, by which I mean the rotation pole of the planet. I don't mean magnetic north. It's almost perfectly aligned to true north. There is an error, though, and the error is tiny. It's 3/60ths of a single degree. My view is that if the Great Pyramid incorporated alien technology, if it incorporated the technology of a civilization that could cross interstellar space, then it wouldn't even be 3/60ths of a single degree off true north. It would be perfectly aligned to true north. If you can navigate across space and find this pale blue dot, and you want to build a pyramid and align it to true north, you will get it spot on, not with an error. I think we're looking at human error there. Interestingly enough, if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you take the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And the error is less than half of 1%, which is very precise. It's far beyond the knowledge and abilities attributed by Egyptologists to the ancient Egyptians. But again, it's not ancient astronaut precise. We're dealing at amazing human workmanship here, in my view, and the objective seems to have been to devise an enduring mathematical scale model of a hemisphere of the Earth on the scale of 1 to 43,200, that this monument should speak to the Earth. And that scale is not random, and I'll demonstrate why in a moment. Well, why? The short answer to that is read Hamlet's Mill. It's one of the most difficult books I've ever read. I had to read it 5 times. It's by Giorgio de Santillana, the professor of the history of science at MIT, and Hertha von Deschent, who was professor of the history of science at Frankfurt University. And what they're arguing in that book is that there is evidence contained in myths and traditions all around the world that the ancients in deep and remote antiquity had understood a motion of the earth, which we call the precession of the equinoxes. And this is to give you a sense of what precession is. If you can see the little GIF that's rotating on the screen, let's point the pointer. From there, half a turn is 12,500 years, and another half a turn, in fact, is 12,800 years. It's about 25,600 years, 25,920 years for the full wobble of precession. And because the Earth is the viewing platform from which we observe the stars, that changes the pole star, and it changes the stars that house the sun on the equinoxes and the solstices. And that's how we get the sense of that we are living in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, because this motion is going to shift the equinoctial sun out of Pisces, where it is presently, and into Aquarius rather soon. And this whole process operates, all you really need to take away from this is that this whole process operates at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. That is the heartbeat of the system. 1 degree every 72 years. One complete house of the zodiac takes 2,160 years to pass through. We've been in the age of Pisces for most of the last 2,160 years. And that's 30 degrees times 72 gives you that 2,160. What Santillana and von Deschent point out is that this knowledge of what precession is was not discovered by the Greeks in the 4th century BC at all. It was discovered vastly earlier than that, because the key numbers relating to precession and key thought tools that describe precession are found in the most ancient myths and traditions of mankind. Many of those myths involving the Great Flood. They are found again and again, and they go back into deep antiquity. And Santillana and von Deschent trace the origins of the system to what they called some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization of prehistoric antiquity that first dared to understand the world as created according to number, measure, and weight. So, that's the scale. 43,200 is a multiple of 62. They have given us the dimensions of our planet on a scale defined by a key motion of our planet. And in my view, that's a very smart thing to do. It's a very clever thing to do, but I believe it's a human thing to do. The system is not only expressed in myth, it's also expressed in architecture. At Angkor in Cambodia, for example, we have 108 statues in each avenue, 54 on the side. Let me explain. 72 plus 36, that's half of 72, is 108. 108 divided by 2 is 54. These are all part of the precessional numbers identified by Santillana and von Deschend. And why am I showing you the Hoover Dam? Well, I'm showing you the Hoover Dam because it has a star map built into it. And I'm telling you this because the idea of providing dating for monuments using the stars is something we do today. Oscar Hansen, who built the star map into the Hoover Dam, said that he believed that in remote ages to come, intelligent people with knowledge of precession would be able to discern the astronomical time of the dam's dedication. In other words, he froze the skies over the dam at the time of its dedication, and you can read back those skies with modern computer simulations using precession, and you can see exactly when this was built. So, Giza in Egypt, this extraordinary architectural site, does it have some dating mechanism built into it? Well, here I am. I'm standing on top of the Great Pyramid of Giza with the second pyramid, the pyramid, so-called Pyramid of Khafre behind me. Lots of graffiti here on top of the Great Pyramid, going back actually hundreds and hundreds of years. And there I found the graffiti of my own grandfather. I would tell the story, but I suspect you've probably all heard it already. No? Okay, so this was, Santa and I have climbed the Great Pyramid 5 times. 3 times illegally and twice legally. This was one of the illegal climbs. But in fact, we discovered my grandfather's graffiti on one of the legal climbs. Here's what it was. 1 step below where I'm standing, I found carved into the stone, quite prominently, the name P. Hancock, 5th of April, 1916. Well, Philip Hancock was my grandfather, and he was a chaplain with British forces in Egypt in 1915 and 1916. So I called my dad, who had my grandfather's diaries, and I said, would you check the entry for the 5th of April, 1916? And he said, okay, and I heard him get the diaries out. There were these little things about an inch high, and he's leafing through them, and he comes to the page, and he says, but Graham, there's just one line here. I said, tell me what it says. He said, climbed Great Pyramid today. So, honestly, standing on top of this monument is an incredible privilege. You can feel the power and the energy just vibrating beneath your feet. You are in the heart of the mystery here. The Great Pyramids overlook the Nile Valley. You won't even be able to see it here with this poor reproduction of pictures, but the Great Sphinx is over here on the left, looking out over the Nile Valley. And let's take precession into account. Let's look at the skies over Giza. And when we do that, and I want to pay tribute to my friend and colleague Robert Boval for the groundbreaking discovery of the Orion correlation, and Robert is talking here at Contact in the Desert. When we do that, and work that Robert and I did together on our next book, which was called The Message of the Sphinx, you find that between the period of 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, on the equinox, you get this amazing sky-ground match. As the belt of Orion crosses the meridian, the 3 belt stars are in the pattern of the 3 pyramids on the ground. The Great Sphinx is looking at the constellation of Leo, its celestial counterpart rising in the sky. Even the Milky Way seems to be mirrored by the River Nile. And I'm quite certain that a huge effort was made to draw our attention to that period with the construction of these monuments using the code of precession. So there's the Milky Way. Let's consider another ancient adage, as above, so below. We here on Earth are part of a giant cosmos, and events that happen in the far reaches of the cosmos affect us here, even though we may not know it or imagine what's going on. And there's our galaxy, the Milky Way, and we're in orbit around the center of the galaxy. When we look up at the Milky Way, we're actually looking at this system edge on. We're looking into the edge of it, and we're in orbit around the center of the galaxy. And it takes hundreds of millions of years to complete that orbit. The sun and the whole solar system is going round and round that huge black hole at the center of the galaxy. And in that process, it's not entirely in the plane of the galaxy. The solar system dives up and down through the galactic plane. And those dives up and down through the galactic plane, approximately every 32 million years, those have an effect on the population of comets that is sent in to the inner solar system. There are two main sources of comets, the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud. And it's the Oort cloud that particularly concerns us here. At a vast distance from the sun, almost halfway to the nearest star, the Oort cloud has trillions and trillions of comets in it. And it's those comets, some of which may be 200 miles in diameter, it's those comets that are disturbed by the orbital path of the solar system, and from time to time they are taken out of safe orbits and brought into the inner solar system on an orbit that crosses the orbit of the Earth. And by the way, comets are not just dirty snowballs. Comets are big chunks of rock bound together with ice. We know that now from the photography of Comet 67P. The nucleus of this comet is about 5 kilometers in diameter. And it's very solid. Now, as I've said, comets can exceed 200, I say kilometers, but actually 200 miles in diameter. But if we take this 5-kilometer comet and imaginarily blow it up to 30 kilometers, that's what it would look like over the city of Los Angeles. Now, we all know that the dinosaurs are extinct, right? And we know why. I think it's generally accepted in the conventional wisdom that the dinosaurs were made extinct by a cosmic impact, by a big chunk of rock that comes in and hits the Earth and causes such devastation that it completely wipes the dinosaurs from the record. It left a distinct trace in the soil. This is called the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary. It's marked by the dotted line here. And it contains very definite chemical products. It contains melt glass, which is very like trinitite, the melt gas caused in nuclear explosions, because the heat of these impacts is unbelievable. It has nanodiamonds. Nanodiamonds are created by the heat and shock of the impact. Carbon spherules. Evidence of temperatures in excess of 2,000 degrees centigrade, the boiling point of quartz, across vast areas of the Earth's surface. This layer alone should have been enough to convince science that it was a cosmic impact that wiped out the dinosaurs, because you don't get those abundances of those particular proxies unless it's a cosmic impact. But science refused to believe Luis and Walter Alvarez, the father-son team who made this discovery. And they underwent 10 years of abuse from their colleagues in science, constant attacks, accused of making stuff up. Of course it wasn't a cosmic impact. And by the way, where's the crater? Well, they said, look, this happened 65 million years ago. The crater has been eroded away. But no crater, no evidence. That was the view. Well, then they found the crater, deeply buried beneath the Gulf of Mexico, the Chicxulub crater. And that settled the debate, actually. There's no argument now. It was a cosmic impact that destroyed the dinosaurs. And more and more evidence is suggesting it wasn't an asteroid, it was a comet. Comets travel much faster than asteroids. They can travel at speeds of 70,000 miles an hour. You get much more bang for your buck with a comet. So, why am I showing you pictures of dinosaurs and chickens? You may well ask. I'm showing you those pictures because these cosmic impacts are world-changing events. They change everything. The dinosaurs are gone. But if they have survived in any way, they've survived in the bird line. So chickens. This event was so enormous that it actually turned dinosaurs into chickens. And at the same time, skulking in the primitive forests, the primeval undergrowth, was this little shrew-like creature, a representative of the mammalian line, going nowhere while the dinosaurs ruled the earth. But when the dinosaurs were swept out of the way, evolution began to take place. And lo and behold, meet your 65-million-year-old mother. None of us would be here if the dinosaurs had not been made extinct, if new niches had not been opened up that allowed this ancestral mammal to undergo the process of evolution. So these events change everything. They change the world. NASA's taken this into account, but NASA likes to keep us all very calm. And so what NASA says is, yeah, big events happen like the event that destroyed the dinosaurs, but they only happen once every 100 million years. I have to say, how nice of the universe to be so Germanic in its timekeeping that we can say only every 100 million years. And if that's the case, we have nothing to worry about now, and comet impacts have nothing to do with the human story. Not all astronomers agree with NASA about this, and I'm showing a group of astronomers here, the late Sir Fred Hoyle, Chandra Wickrem Singh, Victor Klube, Bill Napier, who have been focusing for the best part of 3 decades on the issue of comets. And they are very concerned about comets, and their body of work is impressive. One point they make is that there's an ancient fear of comets. You can't go anywhere in the world, in any ancient culture that I'm aware of, and find comets being portrayed as good news. Comets are always portrayed as bad news, associated with death, destruction, the bringing of disease, and so on and so forth. They argue, why would this be, unless there's some collective memory that we had a problem with a comet once? NASA, again, try to keep us all calm, telling us what a meteor shower is. We've all seen meteors, right? What meteor showers are the fragmented debris of former comets, which are on Earth-crossing orbits. Gradually, a comet breaks up into multiple fragments, and over a long period of time, they break down into smaller fragments, and then you get a huge cloud of debris. That's a meteor shower, and as the Earth passes through it, we see shooting stars. And NASA says, don't worry, because the meteoroids are usually very small, biggest at the fist size. They burn up in the atmosphere, not going to do us any harm. This is comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, which hit Jupiter in 1994. Shoemaker-Levy 9 did what all comets do. It broke up into multiple fragments, only they weren't fist-sized fragments. They were huge, lethal fragments, more than 20 of them. And those of us who remember the coverage at the time will remember the impacts on Jupiter, the giant explosive impacts that took place on Jupiter. The total explosive power of those impacts is 300 gigatons. A gigaton is equivalent to 1 billion tons of TNT. The stockpiled nuclear arsenal of the entire Earth, if it were to explode at once, would be equivalent to just 6.4 gigatons. So this is the moment where I ask you all collectively to join me in saying, thank you, Jupiter. Thank you for taking one for the team. Again and again and again, because none of us would be here if Jupiter was not out there in the outer solar system sweeping up most of the comets that would destroy life on Earth forever. It's our guardian and our protector, and we should view it with gratitude, even as a god, I would say. So comets break up into multiple fragments, and those fragments can be big and dangerous. The group of astronomers I've mentioned are focusing particularly on the Taurid meteor stream. We pass through it twice a year, at the end of June and at the end of October. We see shooting stars at the end of October because they're coming in from the nighttime side of the Earth. In June, we don't. They're coming in from the daytime side of the Earth, but they're there. It's called the Taurid meteor stream because it appears to emanate from the region of the sky where the constellation of Taurus sits. Of course, it's not that far away. It's very close. So, 2 passages through the stream. We have impacts in June, and we have impacts meteorites at the end of October. Interestingly enough, the most recent substantial impact out of the Taurid meteor stream was as recent as 1908. And it happened on the 30th of June, 1908, and that's the Tunguska event. This was a very small bit of the fragmented comet. It was just about 60 to 190 meters in diameter. It didn't even hit the ground. It airburst. It exploded in the air. It flattened an unbelievable 80 million trees across more than 2,000 square kilometers. That's bigger than the city of London. If this event had happened over a center of major population, it would have been catastrophic in its consequences. It's very fortunate that it happened over an uninhabited area of Siberia. So this is a graphic showing the Taurid meteor stream. We pass through it here and we pass through it here twice a year. Each passage takes 12 days. There are a number of large known objects in the Taurid meteor stream. One of them is called Comet Encke, as a matter of fact. It's about 6 kilometers in diameter. It is a fragment of the original giant comet that broke up into multiple parts. And we're looking at a huge turbulent cloud of debris. And that cloud of debris is 30 million miles wide. The Earth travels at 2.5 million miles a day on its orbital path. That's why it takes us 12 days to pass through the Taurid meteor stream. It's a bit like strapping on a blindfold and crossing an 8-lane interstate twice a year and hoping you don't meet any traffic. Or if you do, that it would be motorcycles rather than trucks. So, now another team, a team of geologists who hadn't even been comparing notes with the astronomers until very recently. They started to publish in the scientific press in 2007. The general public is not largely aware of what they found. They're led by James Kennett, who's a marine geologist professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Richard Firestone is a staff scientist, nuclear science division. Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, Albert Goodyear's an archaeologist. James Whitke's a geologist. Alan West is a geophysicist. Actually, there's more than 30 of them. And they have, as I mentioned, been publishing in the peer-reviewed press since 2007. I want to give you a brief glimpse of what they found. But to understand it, you need to understand why they started to look into this at all. Everybody knows the world went through an ice age. The last ice age set in about 125,000 years ago. And it reached its maximum extent 21,300 years ago. That was the last glacial maximum. At that time, the northern hemisphere was covered in massive ice sheets that were about 2, in some cases 3 miles deep. All of that water frozen in ice on the continental land masses meant sea levels were much lower. They were 400 feet lower than they are today. As a result, 10 million square miles of land, that's roughly Europe and China added together, that were above water then are underwater now, since the ice melted. But here's the funny thing. After 21,300 years ago, the world began to warm up. And then, really suddenly, 12,800 years ago, there's an incredible plunge in temperatures. And this is accompanied by massive animal extinctions and by flooding. And it lasts, this plunge of temperatures, for 1,200 years until 11,600 years ago. Geologists call it the Younger Dryas. And the geologists who I just showed you were interested in what caused the Younger Dryas. Why did the world go into this short, sharp, deep freeze accompanied by flooding and animal extinctions? Because the peak of the megafaunal extinctions is exactly there in the Younger Dryas. And it's clear also that the epicenter of this extinction was in North America. North America was most radically affected by what happened in the Younger Dryas, but it was global. It was a worldwide phenomenon. And again, just as with the dinosaurs, exactly at that date of 12,800 years ago, very recently, not 65 million years ago, but 12,800 years ago, you have that same layer in the soil, containing the same impact proxies, containing the nanodiamonds, the trinitite, the melted quartz, and so on and so on and so forth. Definitive evidence of a cosmic impact, clearly dated to 12,800 years ago. I'm not expecting you to read these papers. I'm just putting them there to say we are dealing with absolutely mainstream peer-reviewed science. This is the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It's their first paper, 9th of October 2007, evidence for an extraterrestrial impact 12,900 years ago that contributed to the megafaunal extinctions and Younger Dryas cooling. Then from 2009, shock synthesized hexagonal diamonds in Younger Dryas boundary sediments. Here we have evidence from Mexico, evidence from the Greenland ice cores, evidence for deposition of 10 million tons of impact spherules across 4 continents 12,800 years ago. As the years have gone by, they've refined the date from 12,900 to 12,800 years ago. Journal of Geology, 5th of September 2014, nanodiamond-rich layer across 3 continents consistent with major cosmic impact 12,800 years before the present. And this paper, July 2015, is a statistical analysis of all the sites from which evidence has been gathered. Is it possible that the evidence was laid down gradually, perhaps over hundreds of years? What they've established is that all of this evidence, all of these impacts, the whole cataclysm of the Younger Dryas unfolded in a single terrible day and night. It was a 24-hour event that changed the world completely. Now, the primary impacts were on the North American ice cap. And if I had time, I would show you the devastation of the greatest flood that ever occurred on Earth in the channeled scablands and other areas of the Pacific Northwest, but we don't have time to go into that here. The fact that the impacts were on ice has made it quite difficult to find craters, and the team have been subjected to the same attacks that the dinosaur team were, but just in the last 2 years, just beyond the edges of the former ice cap, significant craters have been found. The Corosol crater, the Bloody Creek structure, the Charity Shoal feature, and the Quebecia terrain. So really, just as was the case with the dinosaurs, this should be a settled case now. That 12,800 years ago, multiple fragments of a giant comet impacted the Earth. Impacts were concentrated on the North American ice cap, but the resulting climate disaster was worldwide. What I want you to keep in mind is that that comet that caused those impacts 12,800 years ago is the source comet of the torrid meteor stream through which we are still passing twice a year. We are intimately connected with it even today. Why did the world get cold 12,800 years ago? Because those impacts on the North American ice cap sent a flood of icy water into the world ocean. It cut the Gulf Stream. It stopped the Gulf Stream dead in its tracks. And the Gulf Stream is part of the global meridional overturning circulation of our planet. It's the central heating system of our planet, and that's why temperatures plunged 12,800 years ago. But what happened 11,600 years ago to end the Younger Dryas so abruptly? Back as early as the 1980s, Sir Fred Hoyle, professor of astronomy at Cambridge University, was already fascinated by the Younger Dryas, and particularly by the sudden rise in temperatures 11,600 years ago, which was accompanied by a humongous global flood. And what he suggested could have caused it was a comet impact in an ocean. A comet impact in an ocean would cause that flooding, and it would send a huge cloud of water vapor into the upper atmosphere, creating a greenhouse effect that would account for the radical warming of the planet. Now, that's a theory. The science on the end of the Younger Dryas isn't as good as the science on the beginning of the Younger Dryas, but here we have Bill Napier, one of those astronomers who's now joining the dots between the work of the geologists and the work of the astronomers. And what he's pointing out is that that comet, which forms the torrid meteor stream, has actually been having impacts with the Earth over thousands and thousands of years. And that it's very possible that the events of 11,600 years ago were caused by a second series of impacts from that comet. As I say, the science isn't complete. We don't know for sure what caused the end of the Younger Dryas. Maybe solar flares were involved as well. But whatever the agency, what's sure is that the Younger Dryas did end abruptly 11,600 years ago. Global temperatures soared, and the remaining ice caps very rapidly collapsed into the sea. This caused a dramatic pulse of sea level rise, which is nominated by geologists as Meltwater Pulse 1b. It takes place 11,600 years ago. Weirdly, Meltwater Pulse 1b, rapid global sea level rise at 11,600 years ago, coincides exactly with the date that Plato gives us for the submergence and destruction of the lost civilization of Atlantis. Plato tells us of Atlantis that it was formerly a beautiful and generous culture, dedicated to the nurture of spirit. But he reports that Atlantis became arrogant and cruel and materialistic, and in a ringing phrase, it ceased to carry its prosperity with moderation. And Plato suggests that it was that hubris, that arrogance of Atlantis, that led the universe to slap it down with the nemesis of the flood. And he tells us that Atlantis at its peak had advanced architecture, advanced agriculture, advanced navigational shipbuilding and seagoing skills, and advanced social and political organization. And yet it was all wiped away, destroyed utterly. We learn that in a single dreadful day and night, Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea and vanished. And Plato tells us that mankind had to begin again like children, with no memory of what went before. Now, let's drill into that date. Plato got the story from his ancestor Solon, the famous Greek lawmaker. And Solon made a well-known visit to Egypt around the year 600 BC. And in that Egypt, he encountered priests at the temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta, which no longer stands. And he claimed that they told him the story of Atlantis, of this great civilization that had been destroyed. And when Solon asked the priests, when was Atlantis swallowed up by the sea and vanished, they said 9,000 years ago. That was in 600 BC. Therefore, Plato is telling us that Atlantis was swallowed up in 9,600 BC. In our calendar, 11,600 years ago. So, if, as the critics claim, Plato made the whole thing up, anybody who even speaks of Plato is called a fraud or an Atlantologist these days. If Plato made the whole thing up, he was astonishingly on the money with the latest scientific information of a truly cataclysmic global flood. Many Egyptologists will tell you that the word Atlantis never appears in any ancient Egyptian text, and that's true. There is no reference to a place called Atlantis in any Egyptian text, but is there a reference to a sacred island of the gods, which was destroyed in a flood cataclysm? Yes, absolutely. And it's carved on the walls of the temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt. This temple is not a very old temple. It's about 300 BC. It's a Ptolemaic temple, but it stands on top of earlier temples, which can be traced right back into the pre-dynastic period. And it inherited the archives of those earlier temples. And amongst the archives, written on animal skins, we are told, was a huge body of texts that the priests wished to preserve, but they were falling apart, those animal skins. So what they did was they took extracts from them and they carved them into the walls of this newly built temple, built in around 300 BC. And they are called the Edfu building texts. And they're found primarily between the inner and outer enclosure walls of the temple. And this is what the Edfu building texts look like, but it's the story they tell that is really fascinating. Because what they speak of is a homeland of the primeval ones, which was an island, and it was destroyed in a great flood. And they tell how the primeval ones, the gods, the survivors of this cataclysm, came to Egypt and established religion by building primeval mounds up and down the land. In a sense, they were setting out a cosmic blueprint in Egypt that would be followed by all later civilizations in Egypt in the creation of pyramids and temples. And we hear that the island of the gods is split, destroyed, and sinks beneath the waves. But there were survivors. The Edfu texts speak of survivors. And they say that afterwards they wandered the world. And their purpose was to reconstitute, to, if you like, to reincarnate, to bring back to life the former world of the gods, the civilization of the former times. And it was a project that was pursued not only in Egypt, but in many other lands. One of those lands, I believe, is the land we call Turkey today, where sits an extraordinary megalithic site called Göbekli Tepe, which is, wait for it, 11,600 years old. Here's what Göbekli Tepe looks like. This is a view of just a small area of the site. You're dealing with T-shaped megaliths, which typically weigh about 20 tons each. And they're arranged in these circles. And the dating is absolutely definitive, and I'll explain why in a moment. We're dealing with an 11,600-year-old site. Looks a bit like Stonehenge. But you know, Stonehenge is 4,600 years old. This site is 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. When we look at a site like Stonehenge, we're looking at an agricultural community that lived around it, that was generating surpluses, that could afford to train specialists, architects, engineers, astronomers, to work full-time on that. At Göbekli Tepe, 11,600 years ago, the local population were entirely hunter-gatherers. They had no background. This site comes literally out of nowhere with no background, and logic suggests that you don't learn to do stuff like this overnight. You have to practice it. So the date that is now being given, this is a quote from archaeologists, for the invention of megalithic architecture and agriculture at Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years ago. Archaeologists are saying that these guys woke up one morning and they invented megalithic architecture and they invented agriculture at the same time. This is the quarry. This T-shaped megalith was left in place because a fault was found in it. Generally, the scale of the place is more human. You do find smaller megaliths, often richly carved with animal figures. This one's particularly intriguing. I go into it at length in Magicians of the Gods. And here I am with Klaus Schmidt, the professor who excavated the site. This photograph was taken in September 2013. Unfortunately, Klaus Schmidt passed away the next year in 2014. But, you know, normally when I turn up at archaeological sites, the archaeologists act rather as one would react to be confronted by a vampire or a zombie. In other words, they make the sign of the cross and run. But Klaus Schmidt didn't do that. He was very kind to me. He knew exactly who I was. And he gave me 3 days of his time to really show me around the site and initiate me into the site. He's pointing at the ground rather vehemently because he's telling me that under the ground is 50 times as much as they have already excavated. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megalithic pillars, complete intact circles underground, all mapped with ground-penetrating radar, but not yet excavated. Second thing he's telling me is this isn't sediment. This is not natural sediment. This site was used for 1,000 years and then it was deliberately buried. Teams of people, hundreds of people with buckets filled with rocks and soil, they came and they filled up all of the enclosures until they'd covered them to the very tops of those 20 feet tall megaliths. And then they carried on and they created a hill over the top of the whole thing. And that's what Göbekli Tepe means. It means pot-bellied hill. And until Klaus Schmidt found the site in 1995, nobody knew it was there. For more than 10,000 years after they buried it, no human being ever saw it again. It's intact, untouched, and that's why we can be sure of the date. You see, you can't carbon date stone. You can't. You need organic material, which is associated with the stone. The association must be very good for you to conclude that the stone is of the same date piece of charcoal you're dating. With this deliberate burial, sealing the site, preventing the intrusion of later cultures, those conditions are met. And that's why we can be sure that Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years old. So rather than a sudden, mysteriously precocious invention 7,000 years ahead of its time, this looks to me more like a transfer of technology from the survivors of a lost civilization who already knew how to work megaliths on a grand scale and who already fully understood agriculture. Because this is the moment that agriculture suddenly appears in that region of Turkey. And Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Here's another unexcavated Göbekli Tepe at Karahan Tepe, 50 miles away, where the T-shaped pillars are just sticking up out the back of a farmer's backyard. God knows what's under the ground in this part of Turkey, and it's desperately, urgently in need of excavation. Bear in mind that Göbekli Tepe is part of the Mesopotamian region. Here we come down to Sumer and Ur and Akkad and Babylon, the whole of the Mesopotamian region. Here's Göbekli Tepe, sitting up between the headwaters of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, near a very mysterious ancient city called Haran. And of course, in Mesopotamia, we have these traditions of the 7 sages, the 7 Apkallu, the 7 magicians who bring civilization to Mesopotamia. And they carry these cute little man bags that you can see here. There's one, there's a 3-dimensional version of the man bag. And the interesting thing is that the same man bag turns up in Mexico as well. Here in the hands of the oldest representation of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, also a civilization bringer to Mexico. He's holding the same bag in the same way. Is that a coincidence, or is something weird going on behind the scenes of history? And then if we go to Göbekli Tepe, on top of Pillar 43 in Enclosure D, well, lo and behold, the same bags appear again. Only there, we know they're 11,600 years old. The city of Haran, near Göbekli Tepe, is an intriguing place. Nothing much left of it today. There was a fascinating ancient people called the Sabians who lived in Haran. And they actually managed to persuade the Muslims during the expansive phase of Islam to allow them to continue with what the Muslims regarded as a pagan religion. They worshipped the stars, they worshipped the heavens, but they were allowed to continue with their religion until about the 12th century AD, 13th century, when the Temple of the Moon at Haran was destroyed by Islam, and this mosque was put there, which itself has fallen down. But interestingly, the surviving minaret of the mosque to this day is called the Astronomical Tower, as though tracing back some memory of the Moon Temple at Haran. The symbol of the Moon Temple at Haran was the crescent moon and disk. We find the same symbol on the pillars at Göbekli Tepe. Now, let me just read this to you, because this is from one of the so-called pagan philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers of Haran, Thabit ibn Qurra. Who else have civilized the world and built the cities, if not the nobles and kings of paganism? Who else have set in order the harbors and rivers? And who else have taught the hidden wisdom? To whom else has the deity revealed itself, given oracles and told about the future, if not the famous men amongst the pagans? The pagans have made known all this. They have discovered the art of healing the soul. They have also made known the art of healing the body. They have filled the earth with settled forms of government and with wisdom, which is the highest good. Without paganism, the world would be empty and miserable. The paganism of the Sabians of Haran involved mathematics, it involved geometry, it involved trigonometry, it involved earth measuring, it involved measuring the heavens. And interestingly enough, thanks to the Arab geographer Yaqut al-Hamawi, we know that until the 12th century of our era, the Sabians were making annual pilgrimages to the pyramids of Giza. And Salim Hassan, the Egyptologist who looked into this, even wonders if the name Sabian came from the ancient Egyptian word for star, which was Sabah, if it came from that, and that they somehow knew that the pyramids were astronomical monuments, and that they made pilgrimages there until the 12th century. But they fully recognized the pyramids as being monuments connected with the stellar cult and revered them as places of pilgrimage. Now remember, I told you about precession and how that's used to give us a scale model of the earth in the Giza Plateau. Within the Great Pyramid, we have a structure called the King's Chamber, great place for meditation. Although I have to tell you, these days, the Egyptian authorities in their wisdom have banned meditation in the Great Pyramid. You make anything like a chant in there, you'll be out on your ear. Bare feet, not allowed anymore. Anyway, the King's Chamber used to be a great place for meditation. Inside the King's Chamber is a 3, 4, 5 right triangle. These right triangles are incredibly useful in trigonometry and geometry. And you have a 90-degree angle in a 3, 4, 5 right triangle, and then the two other angles are 53.13 and 36.87 degrees is the acute angle. That 3-4-5 right triangle inside the King's Pyramid is formed here in this way. Okay, and I'm not going to go into all the mathematics, but basically it also prints out redundantly a number based on the number 72, built from precession of the equinoxes. Now here's the fascinating thing about Haran. Thanks to the astronomer J.Q. Jacobs, he noticed what nobody else had noticed, that Haran stands on a non-random latitude. It stands on latitude 36.87 degrees north. And that is the acute angle in a right triangle. And the peoples of Haran used right triangles in their trigonometry and earth measuring. So there you get it. There's Haran at 36.87 degrees north, set by this right triangle. And something else, really intriguing. We know that Haran is there. We know that it's on a significant latitude deliberately chosen because it's the acute angle in a right triangle. It turns out that Göbekli Tepe is exactly 1/1000th of the Earth's circumference north of Haran. And the only conclusion we can come to, because Göbekli Tepe is older, is that ancient astronomy just took a leap back to 12,000 years ago. And as a matter of fact, Göbekli Tepe contains the world's oldest perfectly aligned north-south structure, which you can only do with astronomy. Göbekli Tepe is forcing us to leap back into the remote past 12,000 years ago or more. And again, if we look at Göbekli Tepe, until the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, this submerged site in Sicily would have made no sense to archaeologists because it's been covered by the ocean for 9,300 years. And there weren't supposed to be any megaliths that old. But now with Göbekli Tepe, we're beginning to see a context for this. We're beginning to see that this goes much further back into the human story. And maybe many megalithic sites that we do know have been misdated. For example, the T-shaped megaliths of Menorca in the Mediterranean are thought to be 4,000 years old, but that's based on very random carbon dating. The site has been exposed to the intrusion of later cultures for very long periods of time. Maybe this site is actually much older than it's been given. Maybe we have falsely young carbon dating from there. And then if you look at the general appearance of Göbekli Tepe, it's really very similar to the incredible megalithic temples of Malta, which are thought to be about 5,000 years old. Again, those Maltese temples have been subjected to the intrusion of later organic materials. I think we're going to have to consider the age of all megalithic sites again. I think Göbekli Tepe means nothing can be taken for granted. And then if we go to Tiwanaku in Bolivia, it's curious that this H motif, we see it as the letter H, which appears again and again at Göbekli Tepe, also appears carved in stone at Tiwanaku, that same H shape, whatever it meant to them, literally on the other side of the world. Now, we're looking down on Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku, by the way, stands at 14,000 feet above sea level. The little aircraft flown by a mad German that we were in was 4,000 feet above Tiwanaku. We did not have oxygen, and Santa needed to get the windows open to take the shots. So it was quite an ordeal, I have to tell you. We're looking down on the Kalasassia here, this huge rectangular structure, and next to it, the Akapana Pyramid, very ruined by treasure hunters. The Akapana Pyramid here, and the Kalasassia here. And in front of the Kalasassia, this is called the semi-subterranean temple. This one here, and it's got an interesting pillar in it. Now, if we look at the Kalasassia, we find that it actually is a two-stage construction. There are megaliths running all the way around it. You can see a view here from the edge. There are these megaliths run all the way around the Kalasassia. They're the oldest part. And the other part, these walls connecting the megaliths, are younger. There's a great controversy over the age of Tiwanaku. Some of us believe that it goes back to 12,000 years ago or more. Mainstream archaeology thinks that Tiwanaku is about 2,000 years old. So let's look at this site again. There's the Kalasassia, and this object in the corner over there, this little object, that's the gateway of the sun. Okay, so let's go take a look at the gateway of the sun. You can see how it plays with the light, how it plays with the sun at Tiwanaku. Having trouble changing the slides. So the gateway of the sun, and here's the point very quickly. The axis of the Earth, it's another motion of the Earth. The obliquity shifts. And when we take obliquity calculations into account, we can see that Tiwanaku was originally laid out to mark the solstices 12,000 years ago. And something else, in that semi-subterranean chamber, that semi-subterranean temple, there's a megalith. Here it is there, and it has a serpent carved up the side and a curious little animal figure there on the side of the head. And then the figure of a bearded man at the front, quite a prominent bearded figure with a sort of chin-strap beard and mustachios there. And this is an image of the civilizing hero of the Andes, Viracocha, who came in the time of darkness after a great flood, bringing the gifts of civilization. When did he come? Archaeologists say that this is all a myth and that Tiwanaku is just 2,000 years old. But that little animal up on the side there, we've turned it on its side, and if you look at it, there it is, and we've highlighted it here. And actually, it doesn't represent any known species of animal in the Andes, but it did 12,000 years ago. It looks exactly like Toxodon, which went extinct in the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas about 12,000 years ago. Is it possible that this is indeed a 12,000-year-old pillar? And then Viracocha, we're told in the myths that he takes his leave from the Andes and he walks on the waters of the Pacific Ocean. And interestingly enough, off the coast of Ecuador, where he's said to have walked on the waters, at a depth of 6,000 feet have been found man-made pillars on the ground. This was on the seabed. This was a discovery in the 1960s. It's never been followed up. What lies to the west of the coast of South America is Easter Island, with its famous Moai statues. Mainstream archaeology will tell you that those statues are 700 or 800 years old. What do they base that on? We can't date the stone directly, so how are they deriving those dates? They're deriving it from these platforms underneath the statues. They've pulled some organic material out of the platforms, and that's 700 or 800 years old, so they say the statues are 700 or 800 years old. But let's consider the possibility that the statues were re-erected by a later culture on their platforms. There's something strongly that supports that. If we go to the back of that platform, we can see in the platform an Easter Island head has been used as a construction block. That alone tells us that the platform is younger than the figures, and that we can't satisfactorily derive dates from organic material in the platform or the figures. And then in the Rano-Raraku quarry, it's an amazing quarry. I mean, it's a surreal place. To be there at dawn or dusk amongst these hundreds and hundreds of stone heads sticking out of the ground, it is spooky beyond belief. You might imagine that they just go down a foot or two under the ground, but that is not the case. And Thor Heyerdahl proved this in 1987 with this excavation. This figure goes 30 feet under the ground. 30 feet. Okay, and Robert Schoch, professor of geology at Boston University, a great man, a colleague, a friend of mine, makes a very interesting point. You do not get 30 feet of sedimentation on a tiny island like Easter Island in just 700 years. It would take thousands of years to build up that sedimentation. So the argument that these statues are much older than we've been told is really rather a strong one. There I am with Thor Heyerdahl himself back in June 2000. He passed away in 2002, a great man. I had the privilege of knowing him, a great believer in Atlantis and in the lost civilization hypothesis. I think if Thor Heyerdahl had known about Göbekli Tepe, he would have been into that site like a rocket because it ties in with everything. For example, he drew attention to the belts that the figures of Easter Island wear and the way the hands are placed across the belly. Well, you find exactly the same way that the hands are placed across the belly in Göbekli Tepe with the belt beneath it. And of course, the Easter Island heads are prominently bearded. I mean, these guys don't just have huge chins, you know. These are beards that they're wearing, and in many cases, they're demonstrated. And like that bearded figure of Viracocha, and The tradition is that civilization was brought to Easter Island in remote antiquity by 7 initiated men who came on ships and who established and laid out the island's future sacred landscape. And that reminds us surely of the 7 sages of Mesopotamia, the 7 rishis of India, the 7 sages of the Edfu building texts as well, again and again. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent holding that same man bag, and these bearded figures from Monte Alban in Mexico, amongst the oldest strata, they certainly do not look like Native Americans. And then Egypt again. Let's go back to Egypt. Osiris, the bringer of the gifts of civilization, also a prominently bearded figure. He was said to have reigned in the remote past, in the epoch that the ancient Egyptians called Zep Tepi, the first time. So when was this first time? When was the beginning of it all? Well, obviously I have a view. The work that Robert Bauval and I did in Message of the Sphinx suggests strongly that they are telling us to direct our attention to the period from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. That's the sky that's frozen in architecture on the ground at Giza. And then something else. Again, the amazing work of Professor Robert Schoch, who was initially brought to the site by the rogue Egyptologist John Anthony West. And I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to John Anthony West, now in his mid-80s, an amazing, brilliant researcher of the mysteries. Thank you. And it's John, with his persistence, that has led to the breakthrough at the Sphinx, because John brought Schoch there in 1992 and said, look at this as a geologist and tell me what you see. And Schoch said, what I see is exposure to at least 1,000 years of extremely heavy rainfall. These deep vertical fissures that we see around the Sphinx enclosure could only have been caused by immensely heavy precipitation-induced weathering. And you do not get that climate in Giza in the last 5,000 years. The Sphinx is supposed to be 4,500 years old, although there's no evidence for that date at all. That's the date that we're given by Egyptologists. But you don't get rain then. You have to go back to the Younger Dryas to get the kind of conditions that could have caused the erosion of the Sphinx. Well, at the time when the case for an older Sphinx geologically was presented, Egyptologists ridiculed the whole idea, particularly these 2 guys, Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass. Okay? Boo! They stand up and they say, of course the Sphinx isn't 12,000 years old. We know the Sphinx is not 12,000 years old. And besides, if there were a culture capable of creating a huge megalithic site like the Sphinx 12,000 years ago, why, there would be many other sites that are that old, and we see none of them. Therefore, the Sphinx definitely dates to 2,500 BC. Well, Egyptologists could get away with that kind of crap in 1992, but they can't get away with it today. Not after the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, which isn't even very far from the Sphinx. If you can make Göbekli Tepe, you can make the Sphinx. We are looking at the fingerprints of an advanced people, definitely going back 11,600 years ago or more to the time of that cataclysm on the earth. Now, in the last few moments, let me run you over to Indonesia, to the island of Java, and to another site that's rewriting history called Gunung Padang. And this is the top of Gunung Padang. It's, of course, a man-made site, been recognized as such by archaeology for a long time. What it uses is columnar basalt, which forms naturally into blocky forms, and then they've used those as construction blocks to create this megalithic site, which is thought, or has been thought, to be about 2,500 years old. And this is more of the terraces at the top of the hill where it sits. This is what it looks like. Archaeologists say it's about 2,500 years old. Interesting, but not very interesting. But hang on. The gentleman I'm with here is Danny Hillman Natwajaja. He is Indonesia's leading expert in megathrust earthquakes. He's a Caltech-trained geologist, PhD geologist, and he's an amateur archaeologist too. And when he came to Göbekli Tepe, what he saw was not a natural hill, but a man-made pyramid, with the known megalithic site at the top of it. So he assembled a multidisciplinary team, mainly geologists, and what they did was they looked inside that definitely man-made hill. They ran remote sensing lines around it. They used seismic tomography, electrical resistivity, ground-penetrating radar, and so on and so forth. Really thorough, detailed geological work around the site, getting a scan deep inside the structure. And then they put down drills, core drills. And those core drills brought up drill cores where pieces of worked stone were found in direct association with organic material that could be dated. And the dates that started to come out, while initially not controversial, got more and more worrying for archaeology. Going back 16,000 years, and in drill core 2, going back actually more than 20,000 years into the past. And then the cavities, the high resistivity bodies within inside this man-made hill, which are indications of chambers, very regular chambers inside the hill. As a matter of fact, they've identified 3 of them. Very exciting. We want to know what's in these chambers. We really would like to know what's in these chambers. The problem is, especially we would like to know what's in these chambers if you consider the Ice Age history of Indonesia, because until the Younger Dryas, Indonesia was a vast continent-sized landmass extending down from Southeast Asia, richly watered, fertile, with an amazing climate. The massive sea level rise during the Younger Dryas caused the flooding of Indonesia, leaving only the islands that we know today, and it's on the highland of the island of Java that Gunung Padang has been found, and that's an artist's impression of Gunung Padang. It would be really, I think, essential. I can't imagine any archaeologist who would be against the idea of finding out what's in those chambers. But amazingly, they are. As a matter of fact, there was a change of government in October 2014 in Indonesia. The archaeologists petitioned the new president, and the new president has stopped all excavation at Göbekli Tepe. It seems almost that there is a deliberate effort to hide and destroy our past. I used the phrase, a species with amnesia, when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, and I've just realized how extensive that is and how we ourselves are constantly in the process of destroying the past and editing and rewriting the past. And that's what's happening at Gunung Padang. But it's too late. The genie is out of the bottle. I would say that for the last 9,000 years or so, I don't have too many bones to pick with history and archaeology. A lot of us working in the alternative field couldn't do our work if it wasn't for the excellent work that's done by archaeologists and people in the mainstream. And I don't want to slag them off. I want to pay tribute to the work that they do. It's not their fault that the evidence for a global cataclysm right in the backyard of history, right in the foundations of history, has only been revealed in the last 7 years. They haven't had time to catch up with it or take it into account. But I would say that what I call the house of history, no matter how beautiful it may appear, it's built on foundations of sand, because in those timelines, no account at all is being taken of a global extinction-level event that occurred right in the foundations of history and may have removed a whole chapter from the human story at that time. Now, the scientific evidence that proved it happened has only begun to emerge since 2007. Its implications haven't yet been taken into account by historians and archaeologists, but I would say we're obliged to contemplate the possibility that everything we've been taught about the origins of civilization could be wrong. And on a closing note, what of the future of civilization? I think NASA's reassuring figure of 100 million year intervals between extinction level events is complacent and irresponsible. In fact, NASA often makes reassuring statements that turn out on closer examination to be based on incomplete data sets. For example, NASA says that none of the asteroids or comets that it has identified will come close enough to impact Earth anytime in the foreseeable future. Quote, all known potentially hazardous asteroids have less than a 0.01% chance of impacting the Earth in the next 100 years. That's NASA in August 2015. The problem is they're only talking about the ones they've identified, okay? And they're very few in number. The scientists who are really studying this field feel that actually they've only identified about 1% of the total population of potentially hazardous objects, with 99%, more than 100,000 of them, still awaiting discovery. So we're surrounded by this cat's cradle of objects. And we'll recall that just last Halloween, an asteroid whizzed past a really close passage to the Earth. NASA only noticed it 20 days before that. So we don't really know what's out there. But more and more scientists are becoming aware that we might not be living in a safe era at all. As a matter of fact, we are living in the same era that our ancestors lived in 12,800 years ago. It may be that that comet has not finished its business with the human race yet, the remnants of which are orbiting in the torrid meteor stream. As I mentioned, it's like crossing a 6-lane highway twice a year with a blindfold on and hoping you don't get hit. The astronomers working with Emilio Spedicato, who's a mathematician at the University of Bergamo, their research and calculations indicate that in addition to the known torrid objects, for example, Enki, Olgiato, and Rudniki, which are all in the range of 2 to 5 kilometers in diameter, there are also, quote, between 1 and 200 asteroids of more than 1 kilometer in diameter orbiting within the torrid meteor stream. And amongst them, these scientists believe there's one very large object, dark object, which is about 30 kilometers in diameter. This unique complex of debris, they write, is undoubtedly the greatest collision hazard facing the Earth at the present time. And this is where it comes down to choice. I am not here to spread gloom and doom. I am not here to manifest destruction. I'm actually here with a positive message, because we are probably the first civilization on this planet that has the technology to intervene directly in our cosmic environment. We could make life on Earth safe from cosmic threats forever if we chose to do so. The problem is money. We're so busy spending money on fear and hatred and suspicion. Human beings have no problem in raising literally trillions of dollars to manufacture ghastly weapons that we can murder each other with on a grand scale. But we are presently spending roughly what it costs to run one McDonald's a year on looking for dangerous objects in the immediate near-Earth environment. This is a bad mistake. We should stop building weapons of mass destruction, and we should start emanating love instead. And when we do that, when we stop fearing and hating and suspecting and start thinking about the future of our children and our children's children, why naturally we would want to make the Earth a safe environment. And we have the capacity to do it. It's just a matter of choice. Now, I want to finish on this note. Let's suppose we don't make that choice. And let's suppose, hypothetically, that the Earth is hit by another 2 or 3 1-kilometer fragments of those objects that are up in the torrid meteor stream. I don't think that our civilization would survive a cataclysm on the scale of the Younger Dryas cataclysm. We think we're very strong. We have this amazing technology. We take it all incredibly for granted, but actually, think about it. It's really very fragile. How many of us actually know how to survive? How many of us have got the complete suite of survival skills? If we were deprived of the support system of the 20th century, would we make it or not? It's a very complicated, integrated, interlaced system, and all the bits have to join together for it to work. Massive comet impacts would break those bonds, and the structure of our society would fall apart. It would be gone. Human beings would survive. And I'll tell you who would really survive. That would be the hunter-gatherers who still live on the Earth today. See, these space images from NASA, they're meant to show us the glories of our technology. So you get Northern Europe, and other technologically advanced areas light up like a string of jewels at night when viewed from space. Oddly enough, when you live in those cities, you can't see the sky at all because of light pollution. But from space, you get all this stuff. But then down in Africa, it's completely dark, because there's very little electrification there. So this is taken as a sort of signature of the progress of the North. And then the Amazon's the same. There's North America glowing, and there's the Amazon basin completely dark. And there are hunter-gatherers in the Amazon who actually don't even know we exist. Occasionally they might see an aircraft flying overhead and think, what the hell is that? They don't know we exist. But I'll tell you this, if such a cataclysm were to strike again, our civilization would be gone, but these guys would not be gone. These guys know how to survive. That's what it is to be a hunter-gatherer. You live on the land, you survive, and they are masters of survival. And 10,000 years from now, it would be their descendants who tell the story of humanity. And might they not remember a time in their myths, in the remote past, when there was a great civilization on this planet, so advanced they had almost godlike powers. They could even send men to the moon. They could fly around the planet. They could talk to one another on opposite sides of the earth. But they became cruel. They became arrogant. They began to impose their power upon others. They seeked to wear their prosperity with moderation. And the universe struck them down. Let's make sure we are not the next lost civilization. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we have, thank you. Thank you. We seem to have 15 minutes. I'm very happy to take questions if the organizers can field some microphones. Okay. I'm thrilled to have Q&A too. I would like you to have a microphone. Do we have a roving mic?
I have a live mic. I just need...
It should be on its way over here.
I think he was first. Oh, here.
Testing. Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Ask a question.
About the bags. What do you think they were used for?
Their stash. I'm partly serious.
Just one quick announcement. An iPhone was found in the restroom. It has
What?
a picture of a black dog on it if you're missing an iPhone.
Sorry, I don't hear you. Scuba diving wrecked my left ear.
You're so kind, I thought I was going to have to come to you. This is the first time I've participated in a Q&A, which is sorely needed after every presentation. Thank you so much for your brilliance. You are the most incredible human being. You are articulate, but you are literate. And your texts, whether they be fiction or non, are just so well written. Here's my question.
Thank you.
I've been waiting for 2 decades to tell you that. Okay, here's the question. At Göbekli Tepe, they have the famous T columns.
Yeah.
In the American Southwest, they have the same exact shape as a doorway.
Yes, I've noticed that.
What is the connection? That's my question.
Well, I'm honestly not sure what the connection is, but when we find the same symbolism appearing in many different parts of the world, we can be sure that something's missing from the story. There's something missing which explains all the dots that are apparently not connected.
Are we talking about maybe an unconscious mind of the species that's archetypal in symbology?
I don't think so. I think we're talking about the dissemination of ideas and knowledge. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Hi, Graham.
Hi.
You've been my inspiration on my research, And I'm here with a message of doom and gloom. And basically, what I've found, and you have this material, and I have it for others, is that the Ice Age civilization was probably under the rule of a large-brained hominid, Homo capensis,
Right.
or something like that, with a high IQ. Lynch and Granger gave it an average IQ of 149, 10% at 180. And I pursued this all through the wreckage of our civilization. Why is everything a mess? Why is everything upside down?
Right.
That was the way I went at it. And I finally encountered the breakaway civilization, which is important. For $400 more trillion have been embezzled from the United States and everywhere else, and built a secret space program, which is, of course, covered up by all sorts of nonsense. But it also built underground facilities and under ocean floor facilities, more than 3 miles deep. So somebody's ready for something. And then it turns out that physics has been totally wrecked by Einstein. And we're essentially 100 years behind in physics. So the secret space program seems to have UFOs that are gigantic, 300 feet more in diameter, and can go anywhere, and operating by non-Newtonian principles. And it seems that it's likely that they've gone up and redirected comet fragments to take us out, because I don't think that the Ice Age civilization appreciates what we've done on the planet. And this is written up in Veterans Today, and you have the material.
Thank you for that contribution. I really appreciate it. Here's the next gentleman.
Yeah, you raised the question of human origins, and you mentioned you believe in UFOs and that sort of thing, but the question essentially...
I'd be daft not to believe in them because the phenomenon is so widespread, yeah.
Right, but in terms of human origins, how did we get here? How far back does it go?
Well, what I'm here today to say is that based on my 25 years of exploring ancient archaeological sites, I see no evidence for anything that could only be explained by an alien civilization. I see evidence for a more advanced human civilization at work, but doing the same kind of things we do, perhaps in different ways. However, and that's why I think that the whole ancient astronaut argument is a diversion. I don't think any ancient site provides good evidence. Hi Rob, if there was any alien intervention in the human story, I would take it right back to the beginnings of life on Earth, right back to the first appearance of life on Earth. The possibility of genetic manipulation being involved in that is extremely high. Francis Crick, the discoverer of the double helix, was himself of the view that we are the result of directed panspermia, that the DNA, RNA system was sent here in bacteria, which then began to evolve. There are highly conserved segments of DNA in which it would be possible to write information. DNA is an amazing storage device for data. And in my workshop, I'll be going into the implications of all of this. There could indeed be alien intervention in the creation of life on Earth, but more recently, I don't see it myself.
Thank you.
How did you get the date for the start of the Younger Dryas, and is it correlated across the globe?
Yes, the start of the Younger Dryas is firmly established. It's within carbon dating framework. You can't carbon date beyond 50,000 years ago, but 12,800 years ago is really easy. The data is in the Younger Dryas boundary, which is all around the world. It's in Belgium, it's in America, it's in Syria, it's all over the place. It all contains the same impact proxies, and the dating is very firm.
Yeah, the sediment layer of the Morai on Easter Island, does that sediment correlate with the Younger Dryas?
The work hasn't been done, so we don't know. It's just very odd that there's so much of it if it all happened in 700 years. But it's a good one to look into, and I think Shock will look into that. Yeah.
Hi, I read your books, they're great. I really enjoy your work.
Thank you.
I wanted to tell you, what do you think about I've heard that there's a brown dwarf planet coming our way with 5 satellites around it.
It's not coming our way. If there is a Planet 9 out there, and it looks like there is, it's on a 10,000 to 20,000 year orbit.
Right, but it's supposedly every 3,600 years it comes around.
No, not that one. I mean, there is this periodicity of the entire orbit of the solar system around the galactic center, with passages up and down through the galactic plane, where we encounter gravitational disturbances that affect the population of comets. That's for sure. But this very likely additional planet that has been grabbed by our sun is not involved in that process. It's on the same journey we are. No. Yeah. Yeah. No. What I'm saying is that, so the question is about the precession of the equinoxes, and do I feel that it's instrumental in this process? No, I don't. I feel it's being used as a clock. I feel that the ancients sought to find a way to send a message to the future. And they knew they couldn't do it in language, because their language might not be decoded 10 or 20,000 years into the future. They needed a universal language. So they used the regular motions of the heavens and the construction of gigantic sites on Earth, locking as above, so below, to spell out a time, to spell out a date. In which we had it happens that period from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago is a period of gigantic cataclysm on Earth, and that is precisely the date they're drawing our attention to. And they're using the skies as a code to draw our attention to that date. Yeah. Okay, I'll take 2 more questions, or maybe 3, but then we'll have to stop. Okay.
Hi, Graham, big fan. Do you think there's any significance to the recent discovery that King Tut's burial dagger had meteorite fragments within it?
Oh, it's very nice to read that. If you follow ancient Egypt closely as I have, you'll be aware that the use of meteoritic iron, if not common, was quite frequent in ancient Egypt, right back to the Old Kingdom. Meteoritic iron was highly valued, and it was called the bones of the gods, as a matter of fact.
How would they know it's a meteor fragment?
Because it contains a very high abundance of nickel.
But I mean back then.
Back then, they saw objects coming from the skies sometimes. They absolutely associated it with fall from the skies. They joined those dots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Smart people.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Okay. One more there. The last one.
I was just wondering, when you find evidence of, large rocks being recycled...
Hold the microphone closer, I can't hear you.
Sorry. When you find evidence of large rocks being recycled by apparent later civilizations, does that necessarily indicate that it was used by people later on, or could it just have been that civilization, reusing their own pieces because of constructional mistakes or damage?
We're constantly reusing the material of previous cultures. Nothing surprising about that. The problem is when that's used, as an argument for the age of a site, when actually what we're looking at is a reuse of an older material. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
If you could theorize as to what world over there is a reason for the suppression of all of this knowledge, all of this connection, what might you theorize?
I think it's because if we recover the truth about our past, it empowers us, and it disempowers the dead hand of bureaucracy, which is desperately seeking to control our lives.
Yes.
I think it's a control issue, fundamentally.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Rob.